Hi everybody, Lance here. Now this week, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to do straight commentary today. Now ladies and gentlemen, you already know the subject. It is about this whole Ebola situation. Now before I begin, here's what the president said.
Today I want to take a few minutes to speak with you directly and clearly about Ebola, what we're doing about it, and what you need to know. Because meeting a public health challenge like this isn't just a job for government. All of us, citizens, leaders, the media, have a responsibility and a role to play. This is a serious disease, but we can't give in to hysteria or fear, because that only makes it harder to get people the accurate information they need. We have to be guided by the science. We have to remember the basic facts. First, what we're seeing now is not an outbreak or an epidemic of Ebola in America. We're a nation of more than 300 million people. To date, we've seen 3 cases of Ebola diagnosed here. The man who contracted the disease in Liberia came here and sadly died. The 2 courageous nurses who were infected while they were treating him. Our thoughts and prayers are with them, and we're doing everything we can to give them the best care possible. Now, even 1 infection is too many. At the same time, we have to keep this in perspective. As our public health experts point out, every year thousands of Americans die from the flu. Second, Ebola is actually a difficult disease to catch. It's not transmitted through the air like the flu. You cannot get it from just riding on a plane or a bus. The only way that a person can contract the disease is by coming into direct contact with the bodily fluids of somebody who is already showing symptoms. I've met and hugged some of the doctors and nurses who've treated Ebola patients. I've met with an Ebola patient who recovered right in the Oval Office, and I'm fine. Third, we know how to fight this disease. We know the protocols, and we know that when they're followed, they work. So far, 5 Americans who got infected with Ebola in West Africa have been brought back to the United States, and all 5 have been treated safely without infecting healthcare workers. And this week, at my direction, we're stepping up all of our efforts. Additional CDC personnel are on the scene in Dallas and Cleveland. We're working quickly to track and monitor anyone who may have been in close contact with someone showing symptoms. We're sharing lessons learned so other hospitals don't repeat the mistakes that happened in Dallas. The CDC's new Ebola rapid response teams will deploy quickly to help hospitals implement the right protocols. New screening measures are now in place at airports that receive nearly all passengers arriving from Liberia, Guinea, and Sierra Leone, and will continue to constantly review our measures and update them as needed to make sure we're doing everything we can to keep Americans safe. Finally, we can't just cut ourselves off from West Africa, where this disease is raging. Our medical experts tell us that the best way to stop this disease is to stop it at its source, before it spreads even wider and becomes even more difficult to contain. Trying to seal off an entire region of the world, if that were even possible, could actually make the situation worse. It would make it harder to move healthcare workers and supplies back and forth. Experience shows that it could also cause people in the affected region to change their travel, to evade screening, and make the disease even harder to track. So the United States will continue to help lead the global response in West Africa. Because if we want to protect Americans from Ebola here at home, we have to end it over there. And as our civilian and military personnel serve in the region, their safety and health will remain a top priority. As I've said before, fighting this disease will take time. Before this is over, we may see more isolated cases here in America. But we know how to wage this fight. And if we take the steps that are necessary, if we're guided by the science, the facts, not fear, then I'm absolutely confident that we can prevent a serious outbreak here in the United States, and we can continue to lead the world in this urgent effort.
Now ladies and gentlemen, that's what it is. Then I'm going to talk about all this panic this week. Now I'm going to start from the beginning with Amber Vincent. Vincent, excuse me. Now ladies and gentlemen, I want to make a disclaimer right now. I am not doing this particular commentary video to make a couple of dollars. I'm doing this video because I live in Akron. So I got to see this unfold firsthand. Now, my very first question to me is this: if what she's saying is true about her repeatedly calling the CDC, then the CDC completely dropped the ball on this. You know it, I know it, everybody knows it. If she's calling repeatedly, find out it was safe to fly, then they have no excuses on this. And speaking of which, if she kept calling, why in the world did she fly? I mean, I understand she was coming here to see relatives set up a wedding. I understand that. But come on, if you had concerns yourself and you were in the room with all that going on, why even come to town? You got to be culpable in this situation. And speaking of people, the next thing I'll move on to is Frontier Airlines. Now, I understand they might not have known. And I'm gonna give them a pass on that part. But I will not give them a pass on letting that plane back in the air supposedly 5 more times. You gotta know better than that, Frontier. And I don't fly, a lot of people don't know that, but I always like Frontier. Because I've flown them a couple of times. They're all right. But you guys know better than that. And speaking of which, the people on that plane. Now, I understand that Frontier is trying to get a hold of all those people. And she was here in town, but there was also other nurses on that plane. And I know they're trying to flag them down, they're quarantine people, which I'll get to here in a few moments. But they should also be a little bit responsible. And that moves me on to the next thing in this whole situation. You know, people, and I'm not just talking politicians like Rob Johnson, what he said, you know, that's inexcusable in itself. I'm talking about politicians, people out there and people out there in general trying to make this about politics. I got news for you, news for everybody there. This is not a political issue. This is a society issue. And you know that. Don't even try to turn this into politics. You need to take a long look in the mirror if you really think this is about politics, because you know it's not. And it has nothing to do about them cutting funding, anything like that. This comes all the way back to this particular incident. How do you let anyone go all the way from Africa to get all the way to Dallas? And that's what this comes down to. It has absolutely nothing to do with politics. And speaking of which, I'm in the camp of a lot of people, is that just not necessarily quarantine, but make this ban flights coming in and out unless it's humanitarian or medical until we get all this figured out. That's the easiest way of stopping this. And finally, ladies and gentlemen, this week on this particular commentary, I'm going to talk about the media in this. You know, the national media is one thing, but here in Northeast Ohio, outside of one media outlet, and that was WAKR, they were straight trying to induce a panic. Now, I understand they have a job to report the news. That's their job. But don't make this into they basically almost turned this into a panic. It got to a point on Thursday that here in town, they had an elementary school closed. There were schools up in Solon that closed. You know, St. Vincent St. Mary, which is the big private school here in town, they let out early. I mean, they're trying to induce a panic for ratings. And I got a big problem with that. And you know better than that. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I know I'm a little long-winded today, and I apologize for that. But I just want to get some stuff off my chest today in this commentary. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I'll be back next week with regular news and political commentary that you know and love. Now, always be careful and remember, fear the root.